What is the state's place in comedy history?
I think they're like the Velvet Underground of comedy. You know what I mean? Like, I think they are your favorite comedian's favorite comedian. You know what I mean? And I hope the film does this. You know, it was a real motivating factor for me, is I hope that the world recognizes that they really influenced so much of the comedy of the past 3 decades, because they were not afraid to be weird and different. And if you look at what came afterwards, a lot more weird and different has entered the world of comedy, and we have the state to thank for that. I hope that this film gives them their flowers that are long overdue.
Yes, that is Matthew Perniciaro, director of the documentary Long Live the State. And you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. And today we are going to talk to Matthew on the history of the legendary sketch group The State, which featured such iconic comedians as Michael Ian Black, Michael Showalter, David Wain, Kerri Kenney-Silver, Thomas Lennon, Kevin Allison, and there's a few more because there were 11 performers in the legendary sketch group The State, whose members went on to do such iconic projects as Wet Hot Crazy Summer, Stella, Risk, Reno 911. It's a regular's who of comedy history. And Matthew's film, Long Live the State, is currently screening at the Tribeca Film Festival, June 12th at Village East and June 15th at SVA Theater. And once again, we are going to do a deep dive with Matthew on the history of the state. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On June 18th, 7 p.m. at Fred's Doghouse, I wrote a play. It's called The Roast of Graham Parsons, which is a collaboration with some musicians from Skinny Dennis, if you happen to know that venue here in Brooklyn. And on June 19th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's, I'll be presenting That 80s Improv Challenge. Yes, 3 improv teams compete by creating scenes based on obscure videos from the 1980s. And it's a very special pro wrestling edition. Yes, all the teams will be creating scenes based on pro wrestling videos from the 1980s. And on June 26th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater in the Village, I'll be presenting AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human rapper take on a machine learning AI in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. Yes, rapper Human BS will be taking on, this month, AI Jesus in a comedy roast battle. And finally, on June 27th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And you can find out all about my shows on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. Also, show Comedy History 101 a little love. Like, subscribe, comment on Comedy History 101 on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. People, this is a free podcast, and we want to keep it free. So help CH101 grow and reach more listeners. And don't forget, tell a friend. And now, without further ado,
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy
Comedy History 101.
Matthew, how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
First of all, congratulations on the documentary. I'm excited to talk to you because also I love the documentary you produced, a band called Death.
Three black brothers from Detroit, Michigan.
What were they called?
They were called Death.
That's a good name.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, so then when I looked on your IMDb today and saw, whoa, that documentary, and note how I'm going to thread this all together is what do you look for in subjects for documentaries that would be similar to a band called Death leading us to the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that has always appealed to me are stories that people kind of know or think they know or don't know anything about. But stories that haven't kind of been given that definitive telling yet. And I think with the state, it was one of those things where it was like so many people know so many of these different actors and members of the group, but not a lot of people know that they all met at 18 years old as freshmen and sophomores at NYU, and that this is a 37-year history. I think that's the part that, I think someone's trying to, I think housekeeping is coming into my thumb. Not right now, thank you. We just premiered the film last night. It was a very late night, so my voice is a little raspy, but yeah, I think that's something that's really always appealed to me is like letting a film kind of give that deeper dive or bringing a story to an audience that even if they think it's one thing, it's actually something a lot more, you know?
Yeah, and when did the state first come on your radar? Like, did we watch it back in the day? Was it later, or did it come through the other projects that the group did?
No, I mean, I was like a day one state fan. So I was like 14 when the first season came out, and MTV as a teenager, when I was a freshman in high school, and MTV was everything, right? Like it was the epicenter of culture. And especially for young people. So I was a huge fan of the show. I watched it every week. My buddies and I we'd record them on VHS because that's what we used to do with TV shows back then, is that like, hey, I want to watch this 10 times this week. If we didn't have streaming, they would air once, you know, or I mean, they'd air it a bunch of times throughout the week, but we would record the episodes and we'd watch them over and over and over again. So I was a fan from the very beginning, and had always thought, like, why hasn't anyone ever done a documentary about the state? They're so influential and they're so funny and like also just such great people. Like, and I was just like, so I knew Joe Latrulio because I'd worked with him on a film many years ago. And when I saw that they were doing the tour, it was this idea that I'd had for years. But when I saw they were doing the tour, I was like, all right, I'm going to shoot my shot. I emailed Joe and I was like, I got an idea. And we got on Zoom with a bunch of members from the group about a week after that. And I pitched my heart out and was like, I've been a fan of you guys for over 30 years, or at that point, almost 30 years, you know, hugely influential to my life and my career. I mean, I went to NYU because they went to NYU. Like, I was like, if that's where people who create things like this go, that's where I want to be. So yeah, I pitched. And then about a week after that Zoom, Joe called me up and was like, we want to do it with you. And that was in November of 2023.
And what was it about a 18-year-old you that really connected with the group, the comedy, and the series?
I think it was their fearlessness, right? And I think especially at that time, you know, you didn't see people just kind of unabashed and just weird and different.
Manager! Hi, what seems to be the problem? We didn't like the way your waiter talked to us. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Okay.
Hey guys, is there room at this table?
Hi, Frank.
TV was really, you know, comedy, especially on television, because you really only had network television for the most part. And they were just so fearless and so weird in like the best possible ways. And I was like, I love this. It felt to me like kind of how I felt as a person. Like I've said, you know, as I've done interviews, like if I met someone growing up who like got the state the way I got them, I was like, I know this person and I are going to be friends. So I think that's what it was. I think it was really just like, it was crazy. You know, it was wild and crazy and different and just so unique compared to everything else of it in its era. I was like a moth to a flame. I was all over it, you know?
Well, it's 5 o'clock. Time to punch out.
Yeah, and then you're like roughly the same age as them, like when it's airing. So it's like,
yeah, I'm about 10 years younger, you know, 9-10 years younger than them. But that was the thing is, it was like, I'm like 14 when the first season airs. They're like 21 and 22. And you're like looking at it going like, you know, you're like, oh my God, like, look how young, like they're doing it. I think that was the other thing is like, they're a group that just does. We have an idea, we go do it. We want to do this thing, we just do it. They don't like wait for permission. They don't ask. They just find a way to do it. And I've found that immensely inspiring and definitely kind of informed, you know, a large part of how I do things, you know.
and so at the time, did they go right from NYU doing shows at NYU to MTV with no kind of middle thing in between?
Yeah, they pretty much went right. So first, David Wain was interning at MTV, I think during his senior year. And there was a show that MTV was making called You Wrote It, You Watch It that Jon Stewart hosted.
I'm Jon Stewart, ex-volleyball star, host of MTV's You Wrote It, You Watch It. You send us your letters, so we reenact them.
And David like pitched the executives and was like, hey, like, why don't we like make like little short videos? I have a comedy troupe. And the executives were like, yeah, sure, whatever, kid. So David had a video camera. And he just said to the group, because they had been performing, you know, at NYU, and David was like, hey guys, I think this is like an opportunity. They went and made 3 short films over that weekend, edited them all together. And on Monday they came back and David showed the tape to the executives and they were like, this is pretty great. And they started making short films for this show. You Wrote It, You Watch It. And that's how they got their foot in the door at MTV. And then off of that, MTV ultimately decided to give them their own show. But yeah, they graduated like June of 92. And I think the pilot for the state shot in November of 92. I think that's what it was. Yeah. But like they were working with MTV basically weeks after graduating college.
And because it was MTV, were like all the guardrails off, or was it a lot of like network notes, or do they kind of just give them free reign?
I think they gave them quite a lot of free reign. You know what I mean? I think they really let them kind of get after it, you know? And I think that like, you know, I think Kerri at one point said like, we do things fast and cheap. Like that's the way that they always operated. Cause they, you know, they did everything. They wrote them, they produced them, they directed them. They were doing the wardrobe. They were doing the props. They were doing everything themselves. So I think MTV was like, all right, just go do it. Like, here you go. And, the network definitely had some notes, and that we talk about in the film, but I think for the most part, like the network was pretty like hands off. And I think that allowed them and Mike Judge and so many of these other creators who were working at MTV at that time, real creative freedom, you know what I mean? To do something that we hadn't seen before.
Was the series of its time, before its time, or we're talking pre-internet, unlike now where you could TikTok it and that would make it catch on more viral?
For sure. I think the series is a great reflection of its time, but I definitely think it was ahead of its time. I think the humor was ahead of its time. And I think if you look at the work that this group did together as the state, but also continued to do after the state, they were kind of always ahead of their time. Like, you know, you go and look at like Stella and you're like, wow, that is like so progressive and so like, you know, playing a comedic version of yourself. It's like almost like putting videos out on the internet before like people even knew you could put videos on the internet.
Surprise! Happy
they really, that's one of the things that was so important to me in telling the story is like, they really influenced so many people after them. And the humor, like I said, that fearless to be different and unafraid to be weird. I think that was really ahead of its time, in a pretty big way.
Yeah, two things I learned is like, first of all, they're working on a show and they're getting about like $400 a week.
Yeah, I think it was like $550 before taxes. Yeah.
Before taxes. Okay. So did they have to have like day jobs while doing it, or because they're living in New York City?
Yeah. New York was obviously a lot less expensive, but I think like they all like lived like three of them in an apartment together. Like, you know what I mean? Like they made it work. But and Kevin told me at one point, I think it was like that they made almost as much on unemployment as they did making the show. And but yeah, I mean, they would pick up like jobs. They'd do their show, and then in the off time, yeah, they'd have to like pick up a job here, pick up things there. But, and I think that was also part of the reason why when, they had an opportunity to leave MTV, I think that was also probably part of it was like, oh, well, we can go to another network, like a bigger network, and like make real money and go head to head with SNL and all this kind of stuff. And so I think, again, you're 23 years old probably at that point. And it's like, how do you not take that opportunity? But I think now in retrospect, they wish they probably would have stayed with MTV for a few more years.
It almost gives me great pleasure to introduce the state.
One, two, three, four. It's the Halloween special. We're decking the halls. We're digging our own graves and we're waxing our balls.
Yeah, but do you think that was sort of like, because they all went on to do such great projects like after the state, that was like a blessing and a curse, but probably not a blessing at the time?
Yeah, probably very difficult at the time. Yeah, no, I think, probably very difficult at the time. But I would say like, would we have Wet Hot? Would we have Stella? Would we have all these other things if the state lasted for 5 more years? Probably not. You know what I mean? Or at least not in the iterations that they came out into the world. So, I think it's so important that like, we really wanted to talk about the film and in the film and honor kind of the trials and tribulations that they've gone through on this journey as well. It's not just nostalgia and fun. It's like, no, like this is like a family, and they've experienced, fights and breakups and all these things, but still after 37 years, they're here together still.
Yeah, and what I couldn't believe that there was 11 of them in the troupe.
There were 11 of them in the troupe, yeah. And there were 11 of them in the troupe, and yeah, it's funny. Tom has a joke in the film that like one guy who was no longer in the troupe quit, and then they added Tom, and Tom was like, I don't know why they needed to add more people. Like they didn't need to do that, but he was thankful because he got in the group that way. But yeah, no, 11 people. And and Kerri has always been the only woman. Well, not always been the only woman. There's definitely been other women in the group, but by the time they got to kind of the You Wrote It, You Watch It in the MTV era, it was just Kerri and 10 dudes.
Was that like intentional to have 10 dudes and just one woman in the group?
Oh, no, I think it was just
get the funniest people.
Yeah. I think just like they started so young, they grew up together. You know what I mean? So I think it was like Kerri and Tom met at theater camp when they were 16 years old. So it's like, these are people who've been in each other's lives for almost 40 years, and that you can't replicate that. And I think, Michael Black said to me once, he said, why did we need to have a different actress in the group? Why did we need to do, like, he's like, we have the funniest woman in the world, and how lucky are we to have her?
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you learn about the state that you didn't know before that really surprised you?
Well, I think one of the things is, I knew this kind of as a fan, but I think a lot of people probably didn't know that they chose to leave MTV, because again, like entertainment news and these things, like they weren't reported the same way these things are kind of reported now. So I think, I don't know if a lot of people actually know. And most people I talk to is like, why did MTV cancel them? Why was that canceled? It was such a good show. And I'm like, It was actually never canceled by MTV. They chose to leave. It was canceled by CBS, or CBS opted not to make additional episodes beyond the Halloween special. But I'm trying to think what else.
So they just did the one episode and that was it.
The one episode, yeah, and it was the lowest. It was like the lowest rated thing. I think it was like them and like a show called Dweebs were like tied for like the lowest in the ratings that week. And basically CBS was just like, yeah, we're not going to.
Corey Feldman
In Dweebs, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But at the time, you touch on what the critics said about the series. Was that the complete opposite with the fans, or was it like Wet Hot, which had $64,000? Sir,
housekeeping. I'm on a meeting. Thank you. Okay.
We got the power of editing. It's okay.
Yeah. 10 minutes, please. All right.
Wait, was it like that at the time? Did it have the popularity at the time? Because you touch on, first of all, the horrible morning, jock radio guy. Yeah. And then the reviews, that you just kind of spun. Yeah.
You were terrible, especially in that first season. But I think that's the thing is, there was an old guard in Hollywood, right? Like this was like the people who were reviewing the show, this was not made for them. You know what I mean? And it was made for people like the state, people, who were like teenagers and in their 20s. And like, that's who it was meant to appeal for, which is why MTV was not at the time, it was the only home that it could have really existed in, but it was the perfect home for it to exist in. And then after that audience got hold of it and fell in love with it and championed it, then everything kind of exploded. And I think that's when it really kind of became a cultural phenomenon. But yeah, I mean, it could have been canceled after that first season and that would have been the end of it. But MTV just stuck with it and said, keep doing it. And they did an amazing promo reel where it was just flashing all the bad reviews and they just owned it. And that literally like made so many people laugh, but also take notice of the show. That was like, why are they telling us it's awful? Like, but it got people intrigued and they went and watched it and they were like, wow, this is pretty great.
Therefore, the CBS special, that was sort of the nail in the coffin for them.
That was, yeah. I mean, Todd Hollebeck had decided to leave the group at that point. I think, he was just at a point where he didn't feel like he was able to, he wasn't, Todd started the group, but I think on a personal level, he wasn't feeling kind of creatively satisfied and wasn't feeling that energy inside the group anymore and wanted to follow a different path and kind of for himself. But all the other 10 members participated in the CBS show. And yeah, after it got canceled, I mean, I think the idea was that the Halloween special was going to launch into like, I think maybe one more special. And then that was going to launch into a weekly series, but it didn't do very well. But the show is funny. If you go back and look at some of those sketches, it's really, really funny.
Yeah. By the way, that Todd Hollebeck, I only after I watched your documentary, I just like looked him up where he is today. He does like amazing digital AI art in Korea.
Yeah, he's an unbelievable media artist. He's a professor and lives in Seoul and has lived in Seoul for like 12 or 13 years. And, and that was the thing is, there's a lot of people in this group that you see their face and you're like, oh my God, it's so-and-so. I've seen them in a million things. I mean, Kerri's on 4 Seasons right now, which is like one of the biggest shows of the year. But then there's like Todd and Kevin, and Kevin's got a great podcast called Risk and has a really, diehard audience, but they're not as immediately recognizable, you know what I mean, for people who didn't watch the state. But I wanted to make sure the film like really acknowledged them as artists, but also as, what they're doing today. You know what I mean? Like what Todd's doing today is fascinating and wonderful. So
yeah, I mean, I think they were all destined to succeed no matter if the state succeeded or not, or even went beyond, season 1 of MTV. I mean, first of all, their incubator is Tisch School of the Arts, which is, that's one of the best media schools in the world. And, they all went on, to such great projects afterwards. And I kind of see like Crazy Hot Summer, American Hot,
Oh, Wet Hot American Summer. Yeah.
yeah, like kind of like sort of that where, at the time it didn't do that well, $64,000. And then, it's like a who's who of comedy, first roles within it.
What's the matter? The phone! The phone! Where's the fucking phone? In the back room!
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's when I say the work that this group has done has always been ahead of its time. I mean, I think you can point to like so many examples, right? Like there's the show on MTV, The State, you look at Wet Hot, right? Like Wet Hot is a beloved cult classic comedy, and it was not popular when it first came out. It was one of those things, even I remember, because I watched it immediately because I was a fan, but like I remember like being at a party, like, I don't know, like probably the end of 2001, early 2002, where people were like, oh, have you seen it? It's on DVD. And like that DVD was getting like passed around and talked about a lot. And like that, you saw it grow over the years, kind of like the same way the fandom of The State was. It was like, oh, you like The State? Oh, I love The State too. Yeah. And like you would talk about it. And like Wet Hot was a similar thing. I think Reno 911, on the other hand, that was kind of like, that was the first big kind of like immediate commercial success, right? Like that was a hit show.
That's 90% of law enforcement is just perseverance, stick to the task.
Hey, Travis.
Right, Sonny? Hey, how you doing?
And but up until that point, it hadn't really been that. It had been more of kind of a dedicated following, and then of course they'd all act in bigger things or were parts of bigger things. But like as far as their own creations, yeah, they were kind of always under the radar when they first came out, but then they developed this like deeply loyal, loving audience.
And what do you wish you could have included in the documentary that you left out?
I mean, the one thing is like, look, like the film is under 2 hours, right? So there's so many things that I couldn't include, or I could only include like a tiny little clip of, one of my favorite sketches, and we reference it, is Asides, which is a sketch that Showalter wrote. And like, we use it in the film. But like, there's so many sketches that like I would love to do, but what I really want the film to be is a jumping off point for new audiences that don't know The State to go rediscover it, right? To go back, like go stream it, go watch every episode, go find your favorite sketches, and then also for people like me who've loved it for many years to have that connect with something that maybe you haven't connected with, that emotion, that younger version of yourself that you maybe haven't connected with in a minute, because our lives are pretty hectic, and that little bit of nostalgia sometimes does your soul a lot of good.
Yeah, and just a couple last questions here. What was it like seeing the live show?
It was awesome. I mean, because, you're in a room. I mean, well, one, we filmed in, two of probably America's greatest live venues for performing, in the Ryman, the Grand Ole Opry, and the Paramount Theater in Austin. So yeah, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, obviously, and the Paramount Theater in Austin, Texas. Just to be like working in like kind of those like chapels of like history is kind of like amazing, but they're filled with State fans. You know what I mean? Like you're filled with just people who traveled, near and far just to come spend a few hours with these guys. So it was a room that was just filled with love and admiration. And, it was really fun to film those scenes.
And what nostalgia or memories did it bring back to you personally?
I mean, well, it was great. One of my best friends, a guy named Chris Drummond, we grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he was the guy that we would VHS tape. Oh, I got this episode, I got that. We'd watch him. And I called him. I was like, hey, we're going to be filming in Nashville next week. Like, get a flight. Like, you can be my PA. So it was a pretty surreal moment because I had not actually, prior to that trip, we'd done a lot of Zooms, but just because everyone's schedules, we hadn't met in person, myself and the group. We'd done a lot of Zooms together, but I hadn't met them in person until we all got to Nashville. And so to have my buddy, who's my friend since we were teenagers, hanging with me, and we're with the state, and we're like looking at each other going like, can you imagine what we would think as like sophomores in high school? Like if this is where we would be 30 years later, like, can you imagine like what we would like? It was impossible to think that could ever be a reality. You know what I mean? From Raleigh, North Carolina. And then there we were. So it was a really special experience.
And lastly, you might have touched upon this, but what is the state's place in comedy history?
I think they're like the Velvet Underground of comedy. You know what I mean? Like, I think they are your favorite comedian's favorite comedian. You know what I mean? And I hope the film does this. You know, it was a real motivating factor for me, is I hope that the world recognizes that they really influenced so much of the comedy of the past 3 decades because they were not afraid to be weird and different. And if you look at what came afterwards, a lot more weird and different has entered the world of comedy, and we have the state to thank for that. I hope that this film gives them their flowers that are long overdue.
Very cool. Matthew, thank you so much. It was really,
thanks.
really great to see the film. Really great to meet you, and congratulations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye. And that wraps up our episode today on the history of the state. Remember, be sure to check out Matthew's documentary, Long Live the State, at the Tribeca Film Festival, June 12th, the Village East, June 15th, SVA Theater. Also, the quick plugs. June 18th, 7 p.m., The Roast of Graham Parsons at Fred's Doghouse. June 19th, 7 p.m., Young Ethel's That 80s Improv Challenge Pro Wrestling Edition. June 26th, 7 p.m. at the Players Theater, AI versus Human Roast Battle. And on June 27th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room, Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. And you can find out all about my shows on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. And a special thanks to my friend Jean-Francois Bresson, who was the associate producer on today's episode. It gave me the heads up on Long Live the State, which once again is showing at the Tribeca Film Festival. And as always, like, subscribe, comment, tell a friend about Comedy History 101, wherever you get your podcasts, or on our site, comedyhistory101.com. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid. I'm trying to use the phone.
Comedy History 101.